Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Dante.
Mario.
And Chi.
So today we wanted to talk about the impact anime has had on us throughout our childhood to our more formative years. One in particular, Akira Toriyama. Wanted to get your opinion on how it's impacted you. You know, being from Japan, growing up with it or not growing with it.
Actually, I'm from Nagoya, and he was in Nagoya too, right?
Mm.
You know that?
Yeah.
Okay. And there is this spaghetti house. It's called Aiueo.
Oh, that's
And then
cool.
he used to have lunch there, and I used to go there. So I don't know him directly, but I felt like kind of connection. So it was kind of weird, like, oh, he really did? Like,
Yeah.
it was sad, but he left so much things,
Yeah.
like Dragon Ball and Dr. Slump. I grew up with them, so.
So is Dr. Slump something that you used to watch a lot, read it, like?
Watched when I was a kid.
Mm.
And Dragon Ball also, because the original manga is for people who are older than me, like 40 years old, 50 years old, not my age.
Okay.
So I was not the right time, but
Mm.
but
So it's
I
been around
used to
for a long
watch
time. Yeah.
a lot.
Nice.
And after Dragon Ball Z, there is
Mm.
the Dragon Ball GT, right? And we have kind of myth, and then the GT means like "Gomenne Toriyama Sensei." sorry Toriyama means like sorry, you left Dragon Ball already, but
Yeah.
we just create.
We just created.
Yeah.
So for those that may not know, after Dragon Ball Z, the studio made an extension of it, and it wasn't with the
Yeah.
original creator, which is why you have the Toriyama-san, Gomenne Toriyama
But
GT. It's
we
a joke,
don't
but
we don't know though.
Yeah.
But it's there.
but that's the ongoing theory, so to speak.
But
How about you?
that just goes to say how popular it was, where you have a creator who's like, basically the story's done,
Yeah.
and it's so popular, there's a demand for it that he kind of had to come back and restart it, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of Japanese manga, a lot of times when the story's done, it kind of doesn't continue,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So now that's not the case with like Naruto or Boruto, but I think at that time that was maybe
Yeah,
one
yeah.
of the first cases where a manga really was done and it was brought back to life
Yeah,
because
because-
it was so popular.
Because Dragon Ball series was the first manga that sold over 100 million comics. Now, like One Piece or Naruto, they sold billions,
Yeah.
but
Because they follow the same type of
Yeah.
pattern and way of telling a story by expanding a story much wider than just its initially main cast. You know, the characters grew, so the world building grew, so they just continued on. Some of them still haven't ended. So I think that's pretty interesting. How about for you?
Just real quick on that note, right before I came in, I researched the highest selling like manga of all time, and of course like One Piece is just like on its own thing, but Dragon Ball is still like the number 4 highest grossing like tankobon, like the Japanese collected edition, number 4 of all time. So I mean it's still relevant, even though like the main Dragon Ball series you could say was between like 1983
yeah.
and 94 or so,
early
Yeah.
90s.
maybe. Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's still relevant and it's still selling with today's top more relevant titles, right? But yeah, so really interesting. Back in the 90s, I remember anime not really being mainstream, right? Back they used to call it Japanimation.
Japanimation, it was still kind of niche.
And I was at a comic convention that was for American comics, and this guy had a booth that had all these VHS tapes that were from Japan, and on the TV screen
Ooh.
there were these like
VHS.
4 blonde guys like flying in the sky throwing fireballs at each other, and I thought they all had the same face, so I was like, it's like 4 brothers. And I'm like, what is this? And the guy's like, oh, it's Dragon Ball. And I'm like, I had no idea what it was, but I bought like all the VHS tapes he had, which were bootleg at that time.
Yeah.
And that was just like my gateway into anime. I had seen a few anime shows before that, Macross, Dragon Ball Z, or not Dragon Ball, Vampire Hunter D. But really, Dragon Ball for me was the first series that I really got into and watched all of it. You know, so I think that's the impact that it has on the West. Is it was one of the first anime that mainstream people really got into. And we can talk about that a bit, but I think that's going to be the lasting impact, is that when you look at where anime is now in America, I think it really all goes back to Dragon Ball. Of course, there were things before that.
But as far as
nothing,
mainstream,
right.
Dragon Ball is definitely one of those. It was one of those series that hit mainstream and just kept going. Because it wasn't, realistically, there wasn't a series, and correct me if I'm wrong, that lasted as long as it did, and that was on more stations at one time promoting the same thing. It's like, of course, you had other IPs that were out there that were from Japan that a lot of us thought they were from the States, and until you got older, you didn't know. So a lot of people, unless they were told specifically that, oh, Robotech, it's not from the States, it's from Japan, and Robotech is actually 3 different series put together into one, no one knew. And I was one of those people because I loved it. But at the same time, Dragon Ball is definitely one of it was the second series that I ever watched. There was like, I need more. I need to see as much as possible. The first one was Hokuto no Ken, Fist of the North Star. Because when I was a kid and living in different places, we had to use satellite or whatever the local cable station was. And whatever was available was what we watched. And at that time, it was those 2. And I didn't know what they were, but they were completely different from everything else on TV. And I could watch them in 2 or 3 different languages, only being able to speak one, but it's definitely what got me into, is like, I need to know more about this character. Well, who is he? Why is he doing like this? And one of the first things I saw actually wasn't from this series, and I didn't know until years later. It was a standalone movie, and it was of World's Strongest. And it's like watching him fighting, and it's like, yo, what's going on? What is this? I need more. Fast forward years later, then you get into the anime conventions, the comic conventions, and you got that, like you mentioned, that 1 or 2 people at the end of the row that have that special booth that they're selling bootleg everything. It's like postcards that are like half printed on to whatever, and it's like, I'll take it. Here's take my money. And I had a bunch of Dragon Ball posters and stuff like that because it was the only place I can get it until, here's something that sounds really dated now that I'm thinking about it, because I think the company doesn't exist anymore, Suncoast. So Suncoast Video used to sell all of them, and it was like, hey, what can I get? What can I get? What can I get? I enjoyed it, and you know, to this day, that main cast is still in my maybe top 5 for anime.
Cast of characters or the actors? Yeah.
Cast of characters.
Characters, okay.
We,
Was it in English? Or have got English
so
subtitle?
when I watched it in English, Japanese, and Italian.
Italian.
Because I was living in Italy at the time.
Oh, okay.
So watching it, they would come on. It was the first thing that came on was the Italian version. Then would have English and then Japanese, or Japanese and English, and they'd be like 30 minutes to an hour apart. So it's like if I missed something, I could kind of catch up that episode on the next one.
So you and Dragon Ball Goku speaks English?
Yeah, so I heard him speaking in English and in Japanese, and it threw me off. I was like, wait, what? Why does it sound so different? Because I'm a kid. I didn't understand what dubbing was.
Yeah.
It's like, they sound like different people.
So
but I watch it anyway.
They released Dragon Ball in the 80s, and it didn't really catch on.
Yeah.
So a company called Harmony Gold, and maybe somebody in the chat can link it. They actually dubbed Dragon Ball like the Chala Head Chala song in English.
Yeah, and
it's just terrible.
I'll say this, for some people they may like or prefer that version, but I will say I prefer the classic original version of the song as opposed to the dub. It just hits different.
Oh, okay.
And then so then it was broadcast in the 90s, like the mid 90s, on this program called Toonami.
Cartoon Sushi.
Like a cable, local access, not local access, but
Toonami.
local cable. And then they redubbed the intro with like a rock. It was like dragon, get the dragon. So it's a completely different feel.
Like, look, so it's legit. Like, hey, this has been taken out of the 80s, and we're gonna stick it here. No one's gonna notice, because Power Rangers was a big thing.
Oh
yeah.
So with Power Rangers theme songs, that's what it reminded me of, but not quite that level.
But they basically took the complete feel of the show and changed it, I think, for like what they thought a Western audience wants. There was actually an NES game that came out.
Oh yeah,
Game?
So
Yes.
there was like a Famicom Dragon Ball game.
Yeah.
Fighting?
No, it was like a Zelda type.
More
Oh,
like an
so
RPG,
RPG.
Yeah, it was an
adventure.
RPG.
Yeah.
And I remember having it as a
PlayStation
kid.
Yeah.
As a
PlayStation
kid,
one.
well,
So
it's
you-
like PlayStation, not PlayStation.
NES.
NES.
SNES.
So
And
you become Goku to play?
You're Goku
Yeah.
with a tail. It's not Dragon Ball Z.
Oh, okay.
It's just Dragon Ball.
Oh, okay. So
And-
the mini Goku.
Yeah, like
Okay.
you. I think Bulma, her father is like one of the boss characters you fight, the Ox King. and- but it came out with no manga, no anime, so it kind of just was a thing that popped up and then it fizzled out.
Oh, okay.
Testing the waters kind of thing.
Yeah. But yeah, like once it came out again in the 90s, it just built up all this momentum, and you had like Toonami had a solid stream of other shows that were on, and that really is how we got to today's like era of most kids, most teenagers knowing
and
about
watching
anime. Dragon Ball was like the main
Yeah.
show in that Toonami lineup.
Yeah.
You know, it was like prime time.
Toonami had, between Toonami and, what was it, MTV, there was a segment called Cartoon Sushi. Yes, I know it doesn't make sense, but that was branded. And what they did was have like 15 to 30 second snippets of different anime slammed together for a commercial spot.
Oh, okay.
So you'd be like one moment, and it was genius marketing, because one time you'd see something for, say, maybe Dragon Ball. The next one would be for, say, something like Ninja Scroll. It's like, oh, what's next? What's next? I want to see where the story goes. And it was, if you look at social media now and how we post things, and to see, you know, how people take to it, like they like it, they don't like it, the engagement, the higher the engagement, the more interest there is initially. So at that time, it's like, well, if people like it, then okay, we'll give the full episode. We'll give a little more. And that's why we ended up getting a lot more animated features after that, from commercials and things like that, not knowing that we had been watching anime offhand for years and never knew, because we assumed that it was an American cartoon. Because you had things like Central Organization of Police Specialists, cops.
That is so obscure.
So obscure, but the reason I bring that up,
Yeah,
because
it's an American cartoon from the
Okay.
90s,
Yeah.
late 80s.
but
90s.
I found that there's a lot of things that I grew up watching that were from here and didn't know until like 4 or 5 years ago. And it was from a random channel where this guy's just doing history about anime. And I ended up researching it, and someone that I work with actually worked for that company. He's like, is this true? He goes, yes, we have it in the archives. Thought you would have known that. How would I know that? So it's like having a string of cartoons and things that we grew up on. When you get older, you find out, well, cartoons over here, anime's over here. This was actually from Japan. And Dragon Ball is one of those, so that just will always stay close to me, because it was one of the first things that I watched. It really inspired me to want to work out more and do better in martial arts, and have that group of friends where, you know, stupid things happen, and then you're like, you kind of play fighting to see who's stronger and all that kind of stuff, but
So-
you're not trying to hurt each other.
Are you telling me
Yeah.
there might be a video of you from the early 2000s of you maybe trying to go Super Saiyan?
I can either I can't confirm or deny, but all I'm saying is I have had blonde hair before.
So this was the thing when, look, I guess when YouTube first came out, is there were a lot of videos of teenagers like trying to go Super Saiyan, just
Yeah.
yelling into like the TV,
Yeah.
uh,
Oh, yeah.
which is hilarious.
It's hilarious.
But
Man, once that vein pops, oh,
so one of the things that I thought was interesting with Dragon Ball is that for it to be aired in on American TV, they had to change quite a few things. And maybe we can talk about this, right? So people didn't realize like how silly Toriyama Akira's like his work was, right? He didn't really take it, I think, too seriously. And there was a lot of humor, like kind of like schoolboy humor in it. Especially in the Dragon Ball series where Goku's a kid.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a really famous sequence they had to, I think, completely cut out of the anime version.
With Master Roshi.
It was Goku and Bulma.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
you know, and I won't go into
Yeah.
details. I'm sure you guys can look it up. But like there's like you could never put that on TV in America in the '90s, so they had to cut those things out. And then
So he's really Trunks' dad.
what's that?
No, he.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. My timer.
Yeah, he wear a Burma on your version, right? Our version, he doesn't wear anything.
Oh right, so there's a scene where like he's like peeing in like a lake or something.
Yeah.
And
So
you know
he
they
is totally naked.
right.
Yeah.
So they actually had to go back and I forget what studio at that point owned the rights. They had to go back and digitally like paint over all
Yeah.
those frames so that he had underwear on, or they would
Yeah.
put clouds or something.
And stuff, yeah. Which usually happens. There's like a extra Nimbus cloud or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So but I don't think a lot of the violence was censored, right? So it's really interesting in American culture where violence is okay, but like depictions
Body
of nudity
parts,
and
yeah.
things. And then there was even where Goku
And
dies. What's that?
And tobacco. That's a lot of.
Oh, yeah.
Tobacco is something. Yeah. So in America, tobacco is also something that's usually cut out of anime. Depending on the age level, they'll take it out.
Oh, okay. How
So,
about
like,
Draemon? Like Draemon is. Have you ever seen Draemon
Yeah.
before?
Yeah.
Draemon is sleeping in a closet, Japanese closet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I thought it was in Korea, and it kind of looked like bullying him, put in.
Oh.
Ah.
So-
So they changed the background.
Well, it kind of makes sense because the same thing that happens with like Harry Potter. He's sleeping in basically
yeah.
storage space underneath the steps.
Oh,
That's his
okay.
room. That's a form of bullying. So I get that. But like with us, it's like taking characters tobacco and changing it to like a piece of
Okay.
straw
Straw,
or
okay.
something else. That happens a lot. But
But fighting and hitting, punching,
problem.
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
killing others.
Murdering, blasting.
beating the brakes off somebody, no problem.
And
No
especially-
problem. And it's like, oh, side boob. You gotta cut that out.
Okay. How about seatbelt?
What?
Seatbelt.
Seatbelts.
Yeah.
It depends on the situation. We've gotten more strict about it later on.
Oh, okay.
But like 80s, 90s, it wasn't such a big thing.
Okay.
But even in Japan, yeah, you can't technically depict someone driving a vehicle without a seatbelt on.
Yeah. So
Oh, wow.
it kind of weird to see like Yakuza and the
Yeah.
Japan. They
With
are
the seatbelt.
they have a drug and a gun and just kill the guy and then they still have to have a seatbelt.
Yeah.
Safety first, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. I remember in Dragon Ball when Goku died, so he goes to the home for infinite losers. He doesn't go to hell.
Yeah.
And so they digitally those guys that have like the track and field jerseys that say hell,
Yeah.
they went back and they repainted it so it was
Yeah.
like home for infinite
Yeah,
losers,
losers.
right? So
Yeah, because depictions of hell and stuff like that, for
Yeah,
a lot
but
of things, it's
your
like, no.
hell and our hell is totally different.
Yes,
Yeah.
but because you're using a Western form of it by using
Okay.
the HELL, that's a no-go. Just
Okay.
like Mr. Satan is Hercule in the
Yeah.
US.
Okay.
yeah.
And Vidal, her name was changed also because her name basically means devil, so they changed to Vidal.
Oh, okay.
It's just like,
Well, I think there's
That's-
another topic that might be interested. So I was online. Everybody right now is flooding the internet with just their own testimonies and things and tributes to Akira Toriyama.
I've got like 30 pictures
One of them,
saved.
one of them stood out to me. So I won't mention the person's name because I don't want to like try to shame the person who did it. But there was a cosplay, and the person, and I won't say if it's a male or female because I don't want to shame the person who's doing it. But they dressed up as Mr. Popo.
I know what you're
Popo.
talking about because I've seen this. Matter of
The-
fact, I
the
saw it
black
this morning. I was like,
Right.
oh, that is so disappointing.
So
I get you're trying to celebrate all characters at the same time.
I
Not
think,
cool.
and now maybe we could give a little bit of context of why that particular character is a bit controversial, right? Without going too far into it,
But
but
first, you know who Mr. Popo is.
Yeah. The
Okay.
black guy.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually,
All right.
maybe this. Okay,
Yeah, 'cause, like-
what are your thoughts on that
Yeah.
character?
Go
When
for
when
her
you
first.
when you read that when you're a kid, what were your thoughts? Was it just like a funny character or?
It's just cute look character. Black.
Okay. Yeah. So, and I honestly want to think that when Toriyama-san made that character, I think it was just out of that like schoolboy kind of like sense of humor. I don't think there was anything malicious in it. But obviously that character goes back historically, almost 100 years ago now to like minstrel shows.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there is like a
and it's
really
hitting
strong
two cultures at once because it's getting India and Africa at the same time.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
you know,
he
so
had a top on it.
Yeah.
yeah. So I think some of his work,
And soup coolers.
would go on the controversial side. But I still always felt that in spite of sometimes maybe going a little bit too far into I keep using the word schoolboy humor or into things that are like almost borderline racist. I still feel like the core of his story was one that everybody could appreciate and get behind and have fun with. And I think that's one thing, as I write manga and things now, is to just remind myself to not get too serious about what I'm doing. And to always have that little sense of humor. Like Goku is a pretty funny character.
Yeah.
He kicks ass, but he also is he's really naive.
Goofy. Yeah. He's a
goofy.
kid.
And I think that's why that character's had such a lasting appeal as opposed to characters that might just be all seriousness, right? Well, I mean, even in a different story, like you mentioned Hokuto no Ken, which I love, but there's not a lot of jokes in Hokuto no Ken, right? It's a pretty straight.
When the bad guys show up.
Well, maybe it's a different type of humor, right?
They ain't gonna survive.
But I'll always remember his playfulness and lightheartedness. And then one thing as well is that he also went across different generations. Like you mentioned Dr. Slump, which I don't think ever was broadcast in America. I never saw it.
I've never seen it. Even to this day, I still haven't seen it. But I'm curious because it has popped up a lot recently. And it's like, okay, what should I start? Well, let me ask you, what should I start with? Should I start trying to read the manga or just watch the anime?
Yeah, it's just comedy. So
Which do you recommend?
There's no storyline.
Oh.
So it's just daily comedy.
Oh, okay.
For what happens to Arare-chan, which is main character.
Oh, okay.
And then if you like Superman, there is Superman. You know Superman? No,
I know, I'm just
Superman.
joking. I know. So Superman is basically this guy who's like super sour, and then there's our Superman. So that's why I'm joking with her. Yeah.
Remember with Superman.
Yeah. He eats plums.
Yeah.
Sour plums.
Sour plums. And then, but he changed it in the.
Everybody would if they had a really
total
sour
box.
plum. It's like,
and then have a costume of S
with the giant S.
But just one thing I also want to mention as well is outside of manga and anime, I think he also had a huge impact on gaming as well. So when you think about, there were some early games like Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest, right?
Dragon Quest,
he did
character design. He did all the character designs for that.
Yeah.
I have
and it's based off of Fukuoka, the map.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Did not know that. Okay. So I have a 13-year-old son, and we just recently went to Dragon Quest amusement park in like the Osaka Kansai.
Oh yeah? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and like my son is 13. He's not really interested in Dragon Ball, but he loves Dragon Quest. So you have one creator who's got this, different properties across different generations, across different media, and I don't know if there's a lot of other people that could say that. Who else in our modern era has had multiple hits across different generations, across manga, video games, anime? So I think it's a loss for not just anime and manga, but it's a loss, for the culture, So yeah, it's a bit sad, but like you said before, he's got a lot of work that he's left, and there's a legacy.
And there's a lot of work that hasn't been finished, and I guess it depends on the story and if it's already been released or not been released. Making the decision: do you initially go and try and complete the story in his honor, or do you leave it untouched? Some fans don't like for other people to pick up where someone else left off. They're like, because maybe that's not what he would have chosen. So just leave it as it is and leave it unfinished. Or you have others like, because this was started and because it had such an impact on me, I'd like to finish the story off. So I hope someone finishes, like his son or his coworker, anybody, please finish the story off, so they feel like there's closure to it. How do you two feel about it?
Well, I was going to ask you. We talked about Berserk, right? And the creator of that passing away, and they're continuing that. What are your thoughts on when a creator passes away? If someone else should continue their work, or do you just leave it alone as it is and try to keep it,
Yeah, I like you can finish your story, right? Like on your understanding of the story anyway. So like I don't want other to finish the story, you know. Because no one can complete the story anyway because we cannot.
Unless you
Yeah.
left like specific guidelines and notes.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Just write this as is kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Wow. Well, maybe this is a good question for the chat. You know, maybe what do you think is should Dragon Ball? And I forget where it's at now because is it Super?
Yeah, but
Right.
then
Yeah.
Toriyama Akira is not drawing anyway,
Yeah.
Okay.
so it's continuing.
So it's already.
series.
So basically, look at it as it's somewhat being taken care of by other writers in the studio.
Yeah. So he already
With
completed
his
his series.
his grace.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
So I
Ber-
mean,
the
you know,
Berserk is not like he died before he finished his work. So.
Yeah.
okay. Well, maybe this is again a question for the chat. You know, and maybe we could talk about Berserk or Dragon Ball. But you know, do you think that when a creator passes, that we should continue the story or leave it as it is? And there are some examples I think when other creators have either passed on or just not finished. Like we could talk about Game of Thrones, for example.
yeah.
We won't go into that, but when you have other writers who come in and try to finish another person's work, you get mixed results sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe in the chat, let us know what you think.
So and adding to that, if someone is finishing the works, would you rather it be someone that had a connection to the original creator or someone completely removed? Which do you prefer? Because I've actually talked to people in both camps and I've heard good arguments for both sides. Yeah. Well, appreciate you guys tuning in, and as always, Shtajio ga daiji. See you on the next one.
See you.